Hello, it's great to be with you. I am Kelly O'Donnell, and my wife, Michelle O'Donnell, will hopefully be with us later. We are currently on two separate continents, and hence it's a bit tricky to record this in advance right now. Today, we are going to be looking at integrity and anti-corruption resources for the global church. We will be looking at organizations, tools, and efforts from across sectors, but especially two broad areas. That is resources for fighting corruption developed by the United Nations, and then from just a few of the major civil society organizations involved in integrity and anti-corruption. We want to do this with a view towards considering how can we connect and contribute to some of these resources, to some of these efforts, and how can they support our work in view of our distinctives and our purposes and our understanding of Scripture and theology. There's three specific resources that articulate why we believe it's important to look at the secular world, look at the United Nations and see what they're doing, get the big picture globally, and how we can understand and benefit from all of their hard work over the decades, really. So these three resources are, the first one is found on the Global Integrity Network's website, a number of resources, both faith-based, Christian, and secular UN, civil society, that we have found to be very helpful. And you can go there and see an annotated list and a short list as well. Then an article we did for the Lausanne movement called Following Jesus Globally, and then a special presentation I did for the Evangelical Mission Society and International Society for Frontier Missiology on why it's important to journey into the Missio Dei. And indeed, as we talk about these resources today, the broader theological perspective is the Missio Dei, the realm where God is at work within the world, both within the church and outside of the church. How can we learn from and benefit from, contribute to the broad Missio Dei in terms of integrity and anti-corruption? So starting with the first broad area, the United Nations, this is a picture, by the way, of just down the road from where we live. We live by Geneva. We work as psychologists. Primary area is in member care, so staff care, development, well-being for Christian mission workers and their families and their sending organizations. And we also work with the areas of integrity, anti-corruption, and in global mental health. And a lot of our work takes place in and around the community of NGOs and United Nations agencies and personnel in the Geneva area. Let's start with this quote from the General Secretary Antonio Guterres for the United Nations. "Corruption is criminal, immoral, and the ultimate betrayal of public trust. We must hold leaders to account. A vibrant civic space and open access to information are essential. And we must protect the rights and recognize the courage of whistleblowers who expose wrongdoing. As an age-old plague takes on new forms, let us combat it with new heights of resolve." So many people in the United Nations and the agencies are fully in with regards to confronting corruption. They see it firsthand. They see its devastating impact on programs, projects, and above all people, and they're doing what they can to combat it. And in general, agencies like working with civil society, and it's a partnership, it's a collaborative effort to prevent, to confront, and to prosecute corruption. One of the chief means for doing this is articulated in the Sustainable Development Goals. There's 17 Sustainable Development Goals between 2015 and 2030, and number 16 of 17 deals with corruption and other areas grouped together. So the goal states, promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. And then there's various targets underneath this overarching goal, and one of which says to substantially reduce corruption and bribery in all their forms. So this is right out of the mouth of the United Nations, you might say, out of its member states, out of the countries that are part of the UN, and this reflects their commitment to fight corruption in its various forms. And it is a good reference point, a good thing to quote and cite as we do our work, so that we could share how we are connecting with the broader global efforts to eradicate as much as possible the scourge of corruption. One of the main areas, locations where this is headquartered and taking place in the United Nations is the UN in Vienna, Austria. There you will find the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, and they've existed since 1995. They have over 500 staff, and they are tasked with working a lot in the area of anti-corruption and human trafficking and various areas like that. There are two conventions that the United Nations has ratified that are in force that deal directly with corruption. The first one was in 2000, the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. And the second was in 2003, which a lot of us are probably familiar with, the UN Convention Against Corruption. We encourage you to read through all of those. Conventions in the United Nations systems are legally binding treaties. And so when you as a country sign them and then ratify them with your respective congresses or parliaments, then you're liable, you are in. You can be held accountable for the extent to which you're putting into practice and implementing the conventions. There's also a variety of monitoring mechanisms within the United Nations, and one of the principal ones is the Conference for the States Parties to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, and then the one on transnational organized crime. States Parties just refers to nations. So this meets every 2 years. And there are monitoring and review mechanisms in place where countries at different times are required to be evaluated by other countries to see to what extent they're putting into practice, implementing their legally binding agreements and commitments. And then you will also see global progress reports on the Sustainable Development Goals. Here's one which two large UN agencies put together, focusing on the SDG 16, which is the one which also deals with corruption. Then within the UN system, there's a variety of events and meetings happening, and I would say the main one is every year on the 9th of December, the International Anti-Corruption Conference. And then 3 years ago, I was privileged to attend, although virtually, the special session of the UN General Assembly against corruption. This was a major event. There's all kinds of major events in the UN, but this one was major because since the 75-year history of the United Nations, there have only been about, I believe, 32 special sessions, and one of the most recent ones that took place was fighting corruption. Still sticking with the United Nations, and let's just review in a bit more detail some of these resources that I touched on briefly. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime has a strategy, and they describe their mission as being contributing to global peace and security, human rights, and development by making the world safer from drugs, crime, corruption, and terrorism, by working for and with member states, that's countries, to promote justice and the rule of law and build resilient societies. So there's many other things, of course, that you're going to find in this strategy, but hopefully you'll want to dive deeper into this document and read some more. The UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime and Protocols. This is the main international instrument in the fight against transnational organized crime. And this is a direct quote from this actual convention. And the convention has 3 additional protocols which target specific areas of organized crime. So there's the protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children. Then there's the protocol against the smuggling of migrants by land, sea, and air. And the third, against the illicit manufacturing of and trafficking in firearms, their parts and components and ammunition. All these things are so influenced by and influence themselves corruption. And that's another good reason why it's important to track with and be aware of some of these protocols, some of these conventions, and so on. Again, we encourage you to delve into that and learn some more. The second convention that we mentioned was the UN Convention Against Corruption. This is probably more widely known. And again, we encourage you to dive into that. The quote from the convention, or sorry, from the website, is that it says it's the only, and it's true, the only legally binding universal anti-corruption instrument The convention's far-reaching approach and the mandatory character of many of its provisions make it a unique tool for developing a comprehensive response to a global problem. And then it goes on and talks about some of the aspects of corruption and so on. One of the most interesting and helpful items, Article 13 in this convention, is the really almost like an admonition and the openness to connect with civil society to work together. In the blue highlights, you'll see to promote the active participation of individuals and groups outside the public sector, such as civil society and non-governmental organizations and community-based organizations, in the prevention of and the fight against corruption, and to raise public awareness regarding existence, causes, gravity, etc. This is the progress report that I referred to in a few slides previously, and you can see what progress is being made or actually what is not being made when you look at the report, setbacks and problems too. Every 2 years, there is a special gathering related to the the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime on the Convention Against Corruption to evaluate and see how countries are doing. And then every year, as I mentioned, it's International Anti-Corruption Day on the 9th of December, which you can participate in, and a lot of people do around the world. And I mentioned briefly that special session against corruption that took place at the UN General Assembly. Civil society has lots of resources also, and two of the most well-known and ones which seem very, very relevant for our work as Christians against corruption is the Corruption Perceptions Index, which comes out every year, and then every 2 years, the International Anti-Corruption Conference. The United Nations Convention Against Corruption has a special coalition of civil society organizations, over 350, based around the world, headquartered in Vienna, that are seeking to collaborate and work together to fight corruption, to educate about corruption, and to hold countries accountable for their commitments to the Convention Against Corruption. A Global Integrity Day is something which my wife and I, Michelle and I, oversee and coordinate. That's every year in its 5th year. The theme this year is fighting human trafficking with solidarity, skills, and integrity. And then I think where you should all be aware of the Global Integrity Network, which is one of the main sponsors for this particular conference. And then another group that we work closely with, the Faith and Public Integrity Network. Global Perceptions Index, when you look at this, Corruption Perceptions Index, it's quite negative for 2023. We have fallen backwards and many countries have backslid in terms of their fight against corruption and some of the perceptions and levels. This is the next International Anti-Corruption Conference organized by Transparency International, and it's going to be held in Lithuania. The theme this year is confronting global threats and standing up for integrity. Great to see integrity right out there, front and center in their efforts. And then if you want to get a bit of a perspective, about 15 minutes worth on the previous anti-corruption conference, I did a short presentation for the Global Integrity Network based on my in vivo experiences in Washington, D.C. In 2022 at this large conference, mostly positive, as you'll see as you listen to and watch the video. One of the challenges is we work in different sectors and with United Nations, Transparency International, and other groups, is there's a language and a glossary, metaphors, ethos, history, and not just worldview that might be different. These are some of the things that were spinning around at the conference, and then also when you read the documents and reports. And it's important to familiarize ourselves with them because they can inform our work, and it represents a lot of the major movement and activity fighting corruption, kleptocracy, state capture, regulatory capture, dark money, straw donors, shell companies, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if you're not familiar with those, then I suggest you review this presentation and look it up because I think it, as I said, it will really inform you about some of the stuff out there and what's happening. Global Integrity Day, I mentioned briefly, looking forward to it coming up in a few days. And this slide and the material underneath get into it in more detail as well as the website. And then the two of the major Christian networks, Global Integrity Network, and then the Faith and Public Integrity Network. So I want to thank you very much for your time and listening. I realize this is really fast. There are notes under the slides, and I would like to encourage you to go through it again and discuss it with colleagues and friends. And I want to leave you with three quotes, but the one in the middle is the one I want to focus in because of time. We heard Bekhat Korani speak in Geneva at the Graduate Institute a few years ago. He is one of the movers and shakers behind the Arabic development report in the past that's put out by United Nations Development Program. And he said this, caught us by surprise, but it's true. I believe it says accountability is good because it requires you to give an account, even if you have to lie about it. That's a very powerful statement. It's very true. And one of the upshots and takeaways from that is we can have all the regulations we want, all the policies, all the collaboration, all of the SDGs, et cetera. But any tool, any agreement is only good as the heart, the character, and the virtue of the individuals and the institutions that are seeking to put it into practice and say that they are committed to put it into practice. Thank you and God bless.